I personally like retro gaming clones, especially the ones that are now coming out in HD. It gives you the opportunity to play your beloved retro video games on your HD TV. It makes the picture quality just a little bit crisper and the colors pop. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, but if you have been following the channel, you would have noticed that I did an unboxing of the new AtGames Sega Genesis Flashback. If you haven't seen that video, a link will be in the description down below. Go ahead, check that video out. Now here goes the clone itself. On this episode of Reviews by This Guy, we're going to be checking out the build quality on this guy, how it functions, how it compares to the original Sega Genesis, and also AtGames' original Sega Genesis composite flashback. Please consider watching this video in all its entirety to the end. I will be throwing a little twist that I did not test in the original video you're about to watch. Thanks to a viewer, they asked a question about a certain game working on the Sega Genesis flashback from AtGames, and that game was Sonic 3. Now I did test that game. Stay tuned to the end to find out what the results were, and also an introduction to a video that I have decided to do just because of testing this game on the system. Alright guys, welcome back to another episode of Reviews by This Guy, and as I said, we're taking a look at the Sega Genesis Flashback HD. This is AtGames' new Sega Genesis clone console. This one has a cartridge slot for reading carts, just like the original composite version of this console. When you first take a look at this console, and it's the reason I bought this one, it looks like a miniature version of the Model 1 Sega Genesis. As you can see, it is extremely smaller in size, but for the most part, it looks exactly the same with some different color variations near the power, and it doesn't have a headphone jack that the original Sega Genesis Model 1 does. It does not have a reset button either. The button that looks similar to the reset button on this flashback is actually a menu button. It'll just bring you up the menu system, which allows you to save games and whatnot, but let's not get into that right now. Let's just look at the build quality itself. This thing is extremely light. It feels very cheap. It feels as though it's made of very cheap plastic, unlike the Retron HD, which feels a lot heavier despite the fact that it is a lot smaller. And it feels as though the plastic is a lot sturdier on this than on the AtGames Sega Genesis Flashback HD. Now the cartridge slot door feels of decent made quality. The plastic doesn't feel as flimsy as the console itself. You have your on and off switch. You have, as I said, the menu button. It brings up the menu system on the console, which allows you to save games, load save states. It allows you to exit to the main menu and other options. You have a power light indicator just like the original Model 1 Sega Genesis. On the front here you have two original Sega Genesis controller ports, and on the back you have your HDMI port and your AC adapter, or should I say DC adapter. This thing does not allow you to use composite like the Retron HD does. That allows you to use both HDMI cables and composite cables. You do get two wireless controllers that feel almost exactly like original 6-button Sega Genesis controllers. Obviously this isn't the original Sega Genesis controllers. Those were a lot bigger and only had 3 action buttons. This, however, feels a little heavier than this guy. I mean, that might also be due to the cord itself, but the D-pads feel really similar. This one feels slightly more flimsy, but not too bad. The menu and start buttons, they feel exactly the same, and the action buttons, in my opinion, they feel the same as well. Like I said, this controller a little better constructed. The buttons and everything feel of better quality than the wireless controller from the Flashback. During gameplay, these controllers, they seem to function exactly the same. I mean, there might be a slight lag with this, but it's not noticeable enough to make gameplay bad. I personally, as John Hancock said as well, I rather the wired controller than these wireless ones, but if you don't have a wired controller, these controllers aren't too bad. I compared the Sega Genesis Flashback HD to the original AtGames Flashback Composite, and yes, I did notice a boost in picture quality. The colors popped a little bit more, the overall picture was a little bit crisper, but this console itself seemed to be a little slower. The actual load screen took forever for the AtGames to come on, and then games took a little longer to load. You put the cartridge in, you have to restart the system, then it will dump the ROM, and then you have to select it from the menu. The Flashback composite version of this console was a little faster. You would put the cartridge in and it would load automatically, just as though you put it in an original Sega Genesis console. I had experienced a freeze when I was playing the Sonic Kart on this Flashback HD. I did not experience that on the composite. At times it seemed like the game was slightly slowed down, but not unbearable. It was still playable. Personally, I kind of enjoyed playing the composite version of this guy more than this. Now, the menu system is way better on this Flashback HD. The colors do pop more. It is an overall better picture, but I don't know if it's better enough to make this guy better than the Flashback composite. The only benefit to this is probably video capturing. But as you see in the gameplay that's being showed right now, I still don't have a video capture device, so I'm still crudely recording it by facing my cell phone at the TV. Now, when I compared this guy to the Sega Genesis Model 1, yes, of course I enjoyed playing the games on the original Sega Genesis. The colors were crisper and popped more. The picture was an overall better quality, obviously, with the HDMI. The Sega Genesis, I believe, functioned better than this guy as well. Obviously, you can pull the card out, the game would still play because it dumps the ROMs. This guy plays at a 4:3 aspect ratio, no matter what. There is no settings to change that, unlike the Retron HD, which has a switch for 16:9 aspect ratio and 4:3. Now, I do want to talk about the menu system a little. The menu system, I believe, is quite annoying. You don't move through the menu system using the D-pad, which is, don't know why they went with that. I did not like that. You use the B and C button. The B, I believe, is for up, C is for down. It might be switched around. It does get confusing. It took me a little while to get used to that, and even still, I sometimes forget and try to use the D-pad. When it all comes down to it, what are my final thoughts of the Sega Genesis Flashback HD? It's not horrible. I mean, that's all I can say. It's not horrible, but I think AtGames could have done better. I think it has potential, and if AtGames can't do better, I think Hyperkin should have made a Sega Genesis clone. I think they would have been done way better. If you're looking for something to play your games in HD, if you're looking to record game footage, it's an option. That's all I'm going to say. It's an option. I might find myself playing the composite version a little bit more. Then again, I might just go back to playing the original Sega Genesis Model 1. Because that's where it started. That's where I enjoyed it. And the games were meant to be played. If you're interested in finding out more about the AtGames Sega Genesis Flashback HD, please click the link in the description down below. If you have any questions about this console. I know, guys, someone asked me to use an EverDrive on it and pure solar games on this console. Unfortunately, I do not own those, guys. I would like to have an EverDrive, but I always found it to be a little too expensive just to put a bunch of ROMs on an SD card and play it on the original system. Might as well just play the original game. If I do happen to get my hands on an EverDrive, I will leave an updated video on it or an updated comment to let you guys know how it functioned. If you like this video, please consider hitting that thumbs up. And if you found it to be of some sort of value, please consider sharing amongst your friends. And as always, if you're interested to see more from the Deem channel, please, guys, hit that subscribe button. As I said, there was going to be a little update at the end of the video, and here we are, and it's not the change of shirt. A viewer asked me whether or not, because they heard that the game did not work, Sonic 3, whether it works on the AtGames Flashback Genesis HD. And the answer is no. I popped the cartridge in several times, restarted the system several times, the game will not load. So naturally I thought maybe it was my cart. I tested Toy Story on there, and after a couple times that game did read. So I said, I need to go further testing this game. So I took the game and put it in the AtGames Genesis Flashback composite, and the game worked perfectly fine. So unfortunately, as far as now, it seems like Sonic 3 does not work in the system, and that led me to think, well, what other games do not work on the Flashback HD? Because that can be a game changer, and it could ultimately make your decision on whether you should purchase this or not. So I will be doing a video where I test a bunch of different games that I have. Now, guys, unfortunately, I do not have EverDrive or any of the homebrew games or games that were released recently by fans. So unfortunately, I cannot test that. I don't have any of those games, can't test them, but I can test the games that I do have for the Sega Genesis and see which ones do work. And that includes Sonic and Knuckles. I will be testing that cart and seeing if that works. My guess is it doesn't. So if you're interested to see that video, please do hit that subscribe button.